This is the Distinctly Detroit podcast, the only pod that explores why one wants to be in the D. I am your host, Fyodor III, the director of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. Join me as I interview students, scholars, leaders, and innovators about living, working, and loving in Detroit. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the DDP. On today's episode, we are interviewing the Associate Director for the University of Michigan Semester in Detroit program. Semester in Detroit has existed since 2008 and is an academic urban studies immersion program based at the U-M Detroit Center, whose mission is to engage U-M undergraduates in substantive, sustained, and reciprocal relationships with the people and communities in the city of Detroit. The program now is in its 14th year and combines a semester-long residence in the city with rigorous academic study and comprehensive community-based internship. The DDP welcomes Craig Regester.
Thank you.
Thank you. How the hell do you say your name?
Well, when I run for office, my yard sign will say register for register. So that's how you say my name.
That's why I used to get that E. I always want to say register. I read it.
That's all right.
Register. And I've known you for like 10 years.
You're not the first one. Thank you. It's good to be
welcome,
here.
Craig.
Yeah,
Thank you for coming on board. So can you tell us a little bit about Semester in Detroit in your own words?
Absolutely. Well, an important part of the story that my great friend and colleague, Stephen Ward, who's the faculty director, always wants to make sure we lift up, which is it was an idea from a student. So like Semester in Detroit, it was not my idea. I wish I would love to claim it, but it wasn't my idea. It was the idea of a woman named Rachel Tanner, who we're still in touch with, actually.
Shout out, Rachel.
Rachel Tanner, who's doing some great work out on the West Coast, and obviously a U of M alum from Kalamazoo originally. But she, long story short, it was a class that Stephen Ward taught, an urban studies class back in 2006. And as a part of that class, there was a final project. And in that project, Rachel thought of this idea. She basically asked the question, why aren't there more opportunities? Why isn't there an opportunity? U of M sends people across the planet. Why don't we have an experience for students that's in Detroit that's more than just a weekend or a service project or an individual class, but a whole program? And so that was sort of the question she posed. And he said, well, I don't know why. Why don't you figure it out? And so she put together a proposal, and then, 18 months later, the program actually is born. But
I had to go through committee.
Went through a lot of people, but it's important to underline, too, that many other students joined Rachel. Rachel recruited other students to get involved, and it was a very student-led effort that eventually gained the support of faculty and staff and other people. And at the time, I was working in a different job at U of M in the residential college, and this class was based in the residential college, so I had kind of heard about it. I was living in Detroit, but working in Ann Arbor, so I was very interested in these ideas and went to some of the early meetings when it was getting sort of organized. But again, Rachel Tanner, Aditi Sogdeo, let's see, there's two other names, Molly McCullough, and Jamie Nelson, I believe. So there were four women that created this thing, and we actually had our 10th anniversary event a couple years ago in 2019, and 3 out of 4 of them came to that event and spoke to students and stuff. It was great.
That's cool.
So, I can tell you more about what it is too, but that's the kind of origin story.
The origins. So Semester in Detroit is founded by a student from Kalamazoo, interesting enough, and founded by a student. That's really exciting. It shows you kind of how the university allows students the opportunity to contribute to their own education. And it's been in existence for 14 years now.
Yep, we're going to have our 27th cohort this summer. In fact, we just started interviewing students this week for what will be our 27th cohort.
Okay, so you do it multiple times per year, academic year.
Yes. So we do it in the early years. We offered it only in the winter semester, and then eventually we introduced and added the spring-summer program. It runs May, June, July. And then we moved to the fall. Anyways, now we run it twice a year, essentially. And so our program, I should probably kind of describe the basics of it. We are in many ways our name. It's an off-campus program for U of M undergraduates, now from all 3 campuses. So we're happy to include from U-M Flint, from U-M Dearborn, and U-M Ann Arbor students, undergraduate students, as well as Grand Valley State University students. So it's a multi-campus program. They all live in Detroit. They take classes here at the U-M Detroit Center, taught by U-M faculty with a range of different curricular offerings. And then most of my work is in their internship. And so each student interns with a community-based organization located and based in Detroit, many of which are grassroots organizations, some of which are larger organizations that have been around for a while. And the student combines the practicum experience in the community with the learning in the classroom, and the combination really is what we've seen be really powerful for our students.
Okay. So how did you all determine to do the internship component? How did that, aside from the academic, like most students, they go do study abroad. They just go to Italy and take classes. How did you all determine to add in the community service component?
Well, there was sort of kind of maybe two answers to that. In the original vision and model that Rachel initially came up with, and other students and folks at U-M helped to build, it had this sort of, they came up with they really wanted an experience that's kind of joined together theory and practice, study and action, essentially, or community work. And to be honest, I wasn't in the room when those conversations happened, so I don't know exactly what the thinking was behind that. I'm sure it was at some level related to certain ideas about the city of Detroit. This is a place that, of course, we know is multidimensional, complicated, and rich in so many different ways, and a place that has historically had a fair number of challenges that many big spaces have had, big cities have had. And so, again, I wasn't in the room then, so I don't know exactly what the thinking was. I do know that once the program was formed, initially, and this is an important part of the story, in the initial years, it was kind of co-directed by the director of the residential college at U-M and the then faculty director of the Ginsberg Center. And so a woman named Margie Dewar. Charlie Bright was the then director of the residential college. Charlie often jokes, he's retired now, but he often jokes that he wasn't the founding director, but he was the found director, because the students sort of found him and throughout the U-M. And so I say that because, as we know, Ginsberg, and folks may be familiar with the Ginsberg Center at U-M, which is a great resource and an important part of the university that has deep and rich ties with community organizations, certainly in Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County, but also in Detroit. And so when the program was sort of based in those two parts of the university, together that led into feeding into existing community partnerships as well as new community partnerships. But a lot of the initial relationships that we had with community partners came from Ginsberg relationships that faculty and staff had. It came from some of my own relationships, because I had then and had lived in Southwest Detroit for about 20 years, so with various organizations there, but also with other people in the residential college. And so the community part, from the very early days, the idea was always, let's not just have classrooms in Detroit, but let's have a program that really combines action in the world, in this case Detroit, with study and theory and ideas in the classroom. And so that was always the combination.
Okay. So what kind of student does your program attract?
I get that question often, and it's a very understandable question. I would say our program attracts the same range of students that you might say, if you ask the same question, like, what kind of people does Detroit attract, over the years, right? Like a wide range, I would say. If you look at the city historically, it's a huge place that used to have 1.8 million. People often say 2 million. So Detroit is an incredibly diverse, again, multifaceted, complicated, wonderful place that attracts just about everything and everybody, right? And so our program is a kind of a microcosm in that respect. So we'll take any student who's interested in cities, who has a real passion and a curiosity about communities and community development, who likes to ask questions and kind of scratch beneath the surface. So in many ways, our program, I would say, is sort of accessible to just about any kind of student. I say that too because we're open to any student from any program at U-M, so you don't have to be a student only in LS&A. You can be a music student. You can think about the music history of Detroit, for example, right? Obviously, a music student would be very interested in Detroit. Think about engineering students. We've had engineering students. Obviously, you think about the auto industry, or just the nature of cities and all the various things that we have to engineer to make cities work. So Think about a history student. Again, the history of the city of Detroit is extremely rich. So think about dance students. And so, education, you name it. So we're really open to any kind of student. I would say the average student is a sophomore or junior. Tend to be more in the social science realm, but that being said, we're open to any undergraduate.
Okay. And how do you identify your community partners, or how do you build the relationships that you've developed with your community orgs that you work with?
Well, like I described a little bit, initially it was from kind of existing relationships, so like Ginsburg, again, Ginsburg was very important for that. Some personal connections, again, that I had with certain organizations in Southwest Detroit, like, for example, Alternatives for Girls, which has been a longtime partner of ours since the very early days. We also have faculty that have, our faculty is small because our program is designed to be intensive and small, so we have about 15 to 20 students per cohort. Our faculty, we have 4 faculty now in addition to myself, and they have their own relationships with community organizations in the city, and have brought that into the fold in different kinds of ways. And that includes, and I want to give a nod to one of our early faculty members, Lolita Hernandez, who's since retired. You remember Lolita?
I remember Lolita.
She's
Lolita.
awesome, and she's in Las Vegas now. And
Oh, the poor thing.
hello, Lolita,
It's
if
a
you're
dry
listening. She was a really important person for establishing partnerships and connections, in some cases with organizations, but also with many really important individual people who to this day shape our program. And the one example that always comes to mind, although there were many, is General Baker, General Gordon Baker, Jr., who hopefully folks have heard the name, but many folks may not have heard the name that are watching, but he's since passed in 2014. But a notable, extremely important labor and community activist that lived in Highland Park for much of his life and has been active in Detroit for his entire life as a labor activist, as a community activist. I mean, up until he passed, he was active in, organizing for pension protection, organizing for protecting the healthcare benefits of retirees in the UAW. And so I mentioned him because Lolita introduced him to our program. Why? How? Because she also worked in the auto plants, right? And so that's just an example of one person, a very important person who we've developed relationships with over the years, including family members of his, including the General Baker Institute. Other faculty, like Stephen Ward is as I mentioned, our faculty director. He's been involved with the Boggs Center, the James Lee and Grace Boggs Center, to nurture community leadership. He's been on their board for years, and so many connections through his work with the Boggs Center. And then other faculty as well who I could talk about. Perhaps I shouldn't forget one of your previous guests, the first official historian of the city of Detroit, Baba Jaman Jordan, teaches in our program now, has for about 2 years. Previously, he would be a guest, he would come into classes, but of course, Baba Jaman has incredible connections to very, very many organizations and people. And so, there's also kind of like the philosophy that we have, which I could talk about, but as far as like who and how, it's mostly through our own personal connections and relationships.
Okay. So if there's an organization out there, someone leading organization, they hear this interview, how do they get involved, or how do they approach you to try to secure a student for their organization?
No, that's a great question. Probably the easiest way is to go to semesterindetroit.com, which is our website. Certainly to email me, Craig Regester, my last name, regester@umich.edu. Maybe it'll be somewhere on the website that this podcast is on. In any case, but please just reach out. We have an interest form on our website. Call us. I think one of our general challenges, which I always say when we have new partners who kind of express interest, is that Detroit's huge. There's hundreds, thousands of organizations here, and we have 15 to 20 students. So every semester we have partners who, unfortunately, we don't have students because we don't have enough students.
Okay.
But we love developing and continuing to develop new relationships with new organizations, with organizations that we didn't even know existed that have been here forever. So it's a big place. We love to get interest from people.
Okay. So what have you found to be the major takeaways your students leave the program with?
Probably there are many. And, obviously, as I described earlier, we get a range of students, right? So somebody coming in here with an interest in, independent media, for example, is going to walk away with other things. Somebody who walks in here with an interest in energy and energy democracy, is going to come away with other things. So there's like the particular experiences that I think for each student it can look very different. But I would say as a sort of, in a general sense, I think our program really helps to complicate the world for our students, certainly helps to complicate Detroit, because I think anybody who's grown up really on the planet Earth, but certainly in Michigan, in the United States, and definitely in Metro Detroit, there's so many stories that our students, that people in this area are fed, that are so incomplete, so out of context about this place that we know of as Detroit. I think we really, students who do our program, whether they're from Detroit or not, and most of our students are not from Detroit, but we absolutely do get Detroiters who do our program as well. Just because you grew up on the east side of Detroit doesn't mean you know anything about Southwest Detroit, right? So it's a big place. But I'd say for anybody who does our program, I think they walk away with a lot more questions. A lot more questions about themselves as people on this planet, and their kind of purpose, about the city itself, like more questions about why. We do a lot of sort of trying to uncover why is Detroit, the way it is today, and you could ask that question in so many different ways. But I think I say students leave with more questions than answers, but I think they also leave, I hope they leave, and I think they do, with recognizing that, and this word is overused, but that they really are part of a community while they're here in Detroit, that Detroit has so many different communities. It's not a singular community, but they get a taste of what it's like to be rooted for a little bit. And not deeply rooted, because it's just one semester, but rooted for a little bit with people who have been rooted and working and involved for the long haul. And so whether our students end up in Detroit or they end up somewhere else, I think in our program you're going to meet people who have been involved in various struggles of various types for a very long time. And so I think our students also walk away recognizing that they need to develop a long view to whatever work it is that they go into. And it's not always movement work, it's not always activist or social justice work, although certainly that's sort of our bent, you could say, so to speak, or our, that's probably not the best word, but that's certainly our emphasis and our interest is social justice work. And so I think students leave our program with a much more complicated, but I think also more sort of pragmatic ways of thinking about how do I engage the world around me, how do I do it for the long haul, not just for a semester.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that comment of saying that they leave with more questions. I think the good education, you don't get all the answers. It just helps you create more refined and more specific questions to keep researching. So I think that's a really awesome outcome. One of the things I think that I really personally was really impressed with that you all did was it was an offshoot of your program. You all created other community engagement in the form of Detroiters Speak.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Well, and you and the Detroit Center, I mean, it's important to mention from the beginning, have been hugely supportive of Detroiters Speak. I'll certainly say what it is in a second, but I just want to thank you because, what is Detroiters Speak? Detroiters Speak is essentially what we call our community classroom. And it really, I mentioned earlier, Lolita and General Baker and really important people that in the early days of Semester in Detroit, they would come and visit a class, right? And maybe we'd have a class that had a few different people come. Maybe there'd be a panel in a class. What we realized after a couple of years, and Lolita, again, Lolita, I mentioned her because she was actually one of the primary people who helped us think about, well, how do we take, each of our classes sort of had developing lists of speakers and people and occasional tours or trips around Detroit. Maybe we should do this in a different kind of way. Maybe we should coordinate, link this across classes and make it, and then the important thing was, this shouldn't just be something for our U of M students, but we should make this publicly available, right? I mean, this could be, anybody could come, right? Why would we exclude the general public? In fact, it would only make the class more interesting for everybody, including our students, including our U of M students. So that was sort of the idea, and a few people came together, and we started organizing it, and like anything, it takes a minute to kind of get it rolling, but it took more than a minute, it took a few years, but so the combination really became public conversations about Detroit, contemporary challenges, themes, hot topics, if you will. Food. Don't overlook the importance of a shared meal, and I think that's a really important thing. It's not just important for like cultural exposure to like different kinds that we all have to eat to live, and that's also there's also ways to support community businesses through buying food, but also there's something really powerful about, kind of breaking bread together, even if it's just a buffet and you're in a room together, but like we all need to eat, we all need to be nourished. And so I think the food part's actually become a really important part of it. It's also not cheap, which is partly why I'm thanking you and the Detroit Center, because you got to pay for it. But it also draws people in, and who doesn't want a nice warm meal, right? Everybody deserves that. So the food's important, the space being open is important, and then the most important thing is in the name, Detroiters Speak. So like while, Detroiters can be defined, who is a Detroiter, right? That's a conversation that's being had all over the place. You've probably had it in this podcast. And what we mean generally is somebody who's either living here, who has lived here, who's been here for quite a while, who didn't just move in, maybe, hopefully they're still here. So we define it somewhat liberally, but for the most part, what we want is we want non-academics, people, they can also be academics, but people who aren't coming from the ivory tower, but who have their own expertise. They may have a lot of formal education, but they're not necessarily, professors at a university. They're folks that have their own expertise in whatever parts of their life or the community they're involved in. And so over the years, we've done a range of different topics. We focused on housing justice. We focused on the labor movement. We've focused on gentrification of Detroit. A lot of things that we read about and hear about in the city. Neighborhoods, downtown versus the neighborhoods, any number of conversations that are on the radio a lot or in the media. And then, but what becomes really rich, and it's kind of hard to describe, you sort of have to come and to see it for yourself, but at our best, we would have 100, 150 people sometimes. I'm not exaggerating. You saw some of these.
I know.
And
we all had to move out of the center.
We had to move to a bigger space, and that was a great problem to have. But, and in that room, you have lifelong learners, you have 70-year-olds, you have 17-year-olds, you have college kids, you have people from Metro Detroit, from Ann Arbor, from everywhere in between, and engaged in conversations kind of cross-generation and sharing a meal together. So that's the model, Detroiters Speak. We're going to keep doing it. We're not doing it this semester. We kind of had to take a break just for sort of some transitional staffing reasons internally, but we're going to keep doing it, hopefully, again in this fall. Our partner in the last couple of years has been, as I mentioned, the General Baker Institute. We've worked with the Cass Corridor Commons, also a longtime partner of ours, and certainly the U-M Detroit Center. So we may find ways to kind of work with each of them in different ways in the future.
That's awesome. I'd love for you to bring that back. I love
Absolutely.
The crowd sizes you had for that were awesome. What are your hopes for the future of the program? What are you hoping to grow? What challenges do you see on the horizon for the program, or what growth opportunities? Topics?
Absolutely. Well, actually, your question about kind of the future flows nicely from, because the model of our Detroiters, because I think in our Detroiters Speak model are some of the kernels or the seeds for something I think even more multifaceted and more comprehensive that we would maybe do in conjunction with some of the partners I mentioned. What do I mean by that? Well, let me put it into context, and I'm not trying to take a detour here, but U of M is doing more and more stuff in Detroit, right?
Yes, it is.
Certainly, this center has been and will continue to be, whether it's here or somewhere else, a central intersection, right? As you know. Yeah. Obviously, I'm saying this because I think what we're thinking about has to fit into the larger context of the city, right? And both what's happening in the city in general, but also what our institution is doing in the city, which is growing by the year, right? So we know about the Marygrove work that the School of Ed is doing, their P20 program. There's some new thoughts there about some undergraduate program they might kind of unfold at the future through the School of Ed. There's certainly, as we know, and we've talked about, the U of M Center for Innovation, right, has been proposed, and clearly seems to be happening now, although it was a little questionable. There was a period there where we weren't sure, but clearly there's sort of this new model emerging. And, that's pretty ambitious, right? $250 million building. There's been talk about Rackham, being a possible space. So and this, I'm telling you stuff that you already know, but engineering, architecture, you name it, right, are doing more and more in Detroit. So in some ways it's like, all right, it's not like we're worried about getting lost in the shuffle, but like back when we started, there wasn't nearly as much happening. And so,
That's what happens when you're a leader.
well, and there, to be fair, there were many things happening before Semester Detroit, like the Urban Research, Collaborative that Barbara Israel and others have been doing, and so, there are many programs out there that have long histories at U of M in Detroit, and good programs.
Shout out Barbara Israel.
Shout out to Barbara Israel, absolutely, and to that whole team, and Angela Reyes, their partner, and many others they worked with, very, very respected for the work and how they do it. Not just that they're doing work in Detroit, but how they've developed. You mentioned, and I'll come back to your question in a second, but you mentioned the sort of reciprocal. You talked about our program as a reciprocal,
Yes.
mutually beneficial program, and that's an aspiration. We want to try and do that, and that's really hard, and it doesn't always happen. Sometimes, many times, our students probably get more out of the relationship than the partner, right? Now that's something we have to pay careful attention to. Our institution has to pay careful attention to that too.
Yes.
It's not just about an individual internship, but I mentioned Barbara and the URC because they've paid really close attention to what does reciprocity really look like, not just beyond the sort of symbolism and the tokenism of the word, but more so in practice over time. Like they've been doing their work for 25 years. Like, how do you actually share ownership with non-U of M people in the development of what you're doing in Detroit?
I keep hearing the word extractive. Detroiters don't want U of M extracting things from the city. They want them to leave something when they depart.
Absolutely. And I don't think anybody's written the book on the long view of, certainly there's when we had our bicentennial, right, and you were involved with that and others were involved with that. Certainly some of the early year history of our institution in the city of Detroit, right, in its first 20 years, very different institution. It was a singular building, very different time, very different in so many ways. But like over the last 200 years, there's been a lot that U of M's done in the city, and much of it has been, I think, very extractive, and mostly serving research interests, scholarly interests that don't ultimately benefit everyday Detroiters or legacy Detroiters, right? They do benefit research and knowledge creation. We wouldn't have a Center for Poverty Solutions, which is another thing I forgot to mention, which has emerged in the last few years, if we didn't have a city that had tremendously endemic poverty issues, right? So how does our institution share ownership with community partners, Detroiters, legacy Detroiters, neighborhood leaders in meaningful ways with resources? And now this is where I'll come back to your question. So we don't have the answer to that as a small program. What we do know is that we have to be thinking, we, in this case U of M, have to really be thinking about whose interests are we ultimately serving or helping to support, reinforce, build, or otherwise lift up. And I believe that many, many people at U of M genuinely have the interests of everyday Detroiters and communities. And there's many different interests at play in the city of Detroit today, right? In any big city, there are competing interests. In fact, there's competing economic interests, And so I think we as an institution, we're a public institution. We're not a political institution in any sort of formal sense. But I think, and I'm going to come back to what it should look like in the future, because that was your question. But I think we have to be mindful as an institution of the various economic interests that are at play in this place, Detroit. And it sounds hyperbolic, but I actually think it's true. Like this question of whose side are you on is a legitimate question. It's a movement question that's been around for a long time. It didn't emerge in Detroit. But at some level, I think that question, we need to be asking ourselves that question, because I think we live in a world where there are sides, There are competing interests, and we shouldn't pretend that they're not there. They are there. And when we get involved in a place like Detroit or a big city, we have to weigh and think about the different interests that are at play, not just we're here as this neutral body that serves everybody because we're a public institution, right? So, to your question, maybe you're laughing, but you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm just laughing because I'm thinking about where this could go, and I'm thinking of the next question of whose side do you think U of M is on?
Well,
I'm scared to ask you that question.
I mean, you know, it would be fair to ask. I think that would be a great question to ask many people from U of M. And I don't think, you know, I'm not at all trying to reduce this. I'm not suggesting that there's simply like, there's this side and that side, right? And that we fall on one or the other. What I am suggesting is that, you know, the political economy of any place matters, and I'm not a political economist, right? So I'm not a scholar in this, but I'm certainly somebody that that was taught by U of M, taught by my own institution that I worked for as a student, to think critically, you know, and to raise important questions, and to scratch between the surface and to ask for what's motivating people to do X, Y, or Z. I think we have to ask that same question of ourselves. We have to ask the question of what is ultimately, why is it that, you know, $1.5 billion is being put into these 10 buildings for District Detroit? Why is it that the U of M Center for Innovation is even being proposed to begin with, right? And I think there's some legitimate reasons why it's being proposed, right? I mean, I absolutely do. Why is one of our biggest donors putting in $100 million? Why are those interests there? You could say, well, there's probably multifaceted. I don't think they're singular either. I don't think Stephen Ross has a singular reason for what he's doing. I think he's.
You don't think vanity is?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know Stephen Ross, but I guess what I'm trying to say, and I'm getting a little, I digress a little bit, but the future of our program, it's a small program, I think has to be shaped increasingly by the community partnerships that we've been developing over the last 15 years. And that, you know, we don't have a steering committee. We've certainly thought about developing a serious advisory board for our program, and I think that probably really needs to happen. We've talked about it. We've talked to our partners about it, you know, individuals in particular. Whatever this program looks like next for us, you know, it has to be shaped by increasingly, I think, and shared, and not just in a way where we're like taking advantage of our partners and their labor to tell us what to do, but that's why I say resources are so important. And I think clearly resources in all sorts of ways are important for the vision of the U of M Center for Innovation, for the Mary Grove, you know, P20 partnership. They got $50 million from Kresge to do that. So like, the resources matter. We're an incredibly well-resourced institution, and whatever is next, I think, for our program, it has to involve a bigger and broader distribution and shared ownership of resources, not just money, but, you know, knowledge and access and opportunity. You know, and if U of M is going to grow its footprint in the city of Detroit, and if we're going to be a part of it as SID in any way, shape, or form, we have to be prioritizing expanding the opportunity of everyday legacy Detroiters over our own, mostly, let's be honest, highly privileged students, you know, not solely, but mostly. And so let's be real about who it is that we serve and educate today, and who it is that we should think as an institution we should be prioritizing down the road. So, you know, SID can only do so much. We're small. I keep saying we're a small program because we are. But we're paying close attention, and we're going to keep paying attention to what our institution's doing.
Well, that's one thing. I believe when what is now called the UMCI, the University of Michigan Center of Innovation, was first announced as the University of Michigan Detroit Center of Innovation, when it was supposed to happen at the former jail site. Sid wrote a letter. Like, didn't you all publish a letter in a daily or something that questioned this investment in this project? I thought that was pretty brave as university employees for you all to step up out there like that. Was there any fallout or, you know, pushback from that? You all, I mean, what prompted you all to make that stance?
Yeah. And that's a great question. I mean, that was the fall of, it was like November 2019. So that was like right before COVID. Yeah. So like everybody at some level, my brain is a little foggy. Thankfully, in all seriousness, thankfully not due to COVID itself, but just due to like the weird time lapse. Yeah. But, you know, we wrote that, and we still have it on our website. I'm happy to share it. It's sort of odd. It's over 3 years old now, but it actually, a lot of the questions we asked, I think, are still pretty relevant. Yeah. I mean, there's Gilbert's company is no longer, you know, a partner in the project, and you know, Olympia Development, the Illich family is. Yeah. You know, I think what prompted us was, in some ways, and this is something that U of M needs to get better at, which is we had been doing then for 10 years. We had been doing, you know, I saw you every day for many years doing work in Detroit with lots of different organizations, but that whole thing came out of kind of left field, you know. So I think part of the motivation was when I read about it in the Free Press. I didn't know anything about this, and it's not like I expected Gilbert to call me and ask, but you know, it was kind of like, how does something this massive that our institution is doing in Detroit, how does nobody have any idea who's doing work in Detroit? About how are we all surprised?
Schlissel didn't have you in his speed
Schlissel he did not call me. You know, and again, it's not just about me. It was about like Barbara Israel. It was about other people that we know. Larry Gantz, you know, people that have been doing work in Detroit for a very long time. How do these people not even get a call or have any idea for this massive new investment that has innovation wrapped all around it? And so I think part of it was just frustration, you know, like, come on, you know, like, we're going to say something. If you're not, we don't care if you don't ask us, we're going to say something anyways. You know, and I think, you know, I don't know. I mean, the way in which we did it, you know, I think we got our hands slapped a little bit, but I think it was more so of kind of how we did it, not that we did it, you know, like how did we sign it and name, that kind of stuff. But, you know, initially we put out a statement that was sort of under the Semester in Detroit name, but it didn't add our actual names. And so that was, that was an error. So then we corrected it. I put my name, Stephen Ward, and then my colleague who's since gone on to a different job, Ryan Berger, also added their name as well. And so, you know, and I don't want to go through all the details, but I mean, a lot of the questions that we asked were really some of what I already asked, like whose interests are this proposal really responding to what extent do everyday Detroiters, does the community or communities, I should say, in Detroit outside of downtown have a say or an influence in what's going to actually happen in this innovation center? Should there be some sort of process that engages the broader community of Detroit not just in a sort of a quick tokenized way, but in a meaningful, sustained way over time to help shape the programming of this public institution, you know. And so, and there were other questions too that we asked about, and I don't have the link. Obviously, I can't remember what it is. But the questions, you know, now today is sort of jumping ahead to today. I'll just say, as you know, and there is, I think, and you're doing some of this work. Like I think some of the questions that we raised, I'm not going to say it was because we raised them, but certainly the new vision for the U of M Center for Innovation today, it's a different vision. I know it has a sort of mixed model vision, which was not originally a part of the idea. I think that's a really good step in the right direction. You know, we certainly, within Semester in Detroit, we have thoughts about how, you know, what might we design, you know, like what would our innovation center look like, you know, and I think I can just say in a preliminary sense that it would probably look really different. It would have, first of all, like the teachers would be, in the spirit of Detroiters Speak, it would like who the instructors would be, would probably be a real mix, you know, it wouldn't just be faculty. And I don't know, maybe this is part of the vision for the Center for Innovation. I don't think I've heard this yet, but you would actually draw knowledge and expertise from Detroit and not from just the traditional sources, you know, from like the non-traditional sources. You would have somebody like Bobby Jaman Jordan, who, while he doesn't have his PhD in history, he was, for a reason, named the first official historian of the city of Detroit. So he'd probably be teaching in our Center for Innovation if Semester in Detroit had a Center for Innovation. And it would probably be, I think, more explicitly oriented towards community benefits, both broadly defined and very specifically defined. And I believe that a part of the vision of the current U of M, it's absolutely about workforce development. It's about jobs, so I'm not trying to say that that's not a part of the vision at all. But I do think it would have a much more community-based and sort of rooted place. It wouldn't be downtown. You know, if there's a place that doesn't need more resources for development, it's downtown Detroit. Other parts of the city do, but not downtown Detroit. You know, so like it would be probably in a neighborhood. You know, I mean, yeah, people live downtown, but it would be it'd probably be in a historic neighborhood. So, and it would have shared vision and shared ownership over what the programming looks like, who the instructors are, and there would be and I hope this is going to happen with the U of M Center for Innovation, but there would be some real clear measurables and benchmarks for what it is that we're doing. So there's more that we could talk about, but not maybe maybe in a future podcast.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll have to do some more talking with you. But we are going to switch it up a little bit here and change it up. We're going to enter into what we call our lightning round. This is where we ask all of our guests the same questions, kind of get a sense about your engagement in the city of Detroit, your thoughts on the city. And the first question is, what is your Coney order?
Well, they pretty much all serve breakfast usually, right?
Yes, most of yeah.
Nah, that sounded like an ignorant question, but I mean, honestly, give me all the meats and the double, sunny side up eggs and some rye toast.
Okay. Fago or Verner's?
Verner's.
Okay. Better Made or Lay's?
Oh, better made. That's easy.
Okay. Who's your favorite Detroit athlete?
My favorite Detroit athlete is probably the microwave.
Oh, Vinnie Johnson. Okay.
Yep.
Favorite Detroit sports team?
Pittsburgh Steelers. Which is, some people say that Pittsburgh Steelers are kind of like the cousin to Detroit because we've had a lot of players go back and forth over the years, and it's a very similar town.
He's just a contrarian, ladies and gentlemen.
So I was born in Pittsburgh,
Okay.
but anyways.
Yeah.
So.
Favorite Motown artist?
Stevie. Got to be Stevie.
That's 3 guests in a row.
Oh, is that right?
Stevie
Yeah, I
Wonder,
mean, and
3
his
guests in a row?
Grammys performance was okay. I mean, Higher Ground was pretty awesome, but no, Stevie, 100%.
I probably said this a few times now because people keep mentioning Stevie, but I got to see him as a kid in Square Circle album concert, and it was wild because he had a piano on the stage. He's at the piano, and the stage rotated, so like he was in the middle, and the stage rotated.
That would have been.
It was-
I would
yeah,
love.
it
I
was
still
great.
want. I'm hoping I can see him. Did you seen the documentary Summer of Soul yet?
I have not.
Oh man! It starts with Stevie doing a drum solo.
Okay.
And I don't know how old he was. I mean, he was not that old. I don't know how old. This was like, when was this, mid 60s, late 60s? Anyways, it is unbelievable, his drum solo. Oh my God, just for that alone, you got to watch it.
Okay. I'll check that out.
Yeah.
Where do you like to go in the city?
Oh, I used to live in Southwest, Hubbard Farms. So honestly, Clark Park is one of my favorite parks in Detroit. I mean, obviously Belle Isle is Belle Isle. You can't beat Belle Isle. But Clark Park, I love going there. I mean, I live in Berkeley now, full disclosure, I've lived in Berkeley now for 10 years. I didn't really get into that story, but I lived in Southwest for about 18 years. So Clark Park, absolutely. I would say Burt's Jazz Club on a Thursday night when they have their open jazz jam, and I get the catfish and the yams.
Okay.
Those are good. But Burt's on a Thursday. Burt's any day, but Burt's on a Thursday in particular. And I don't know. I feel like I should give a third one. Probably Lupita's Taqueria, which is like one of the first really, and it's gotten a lot of acclaim, but the first, I think, really good authentic taquerias, taco shops, like right on Bagley where Social Milkos and all those are. But
Yeah.
Lupita's Taqueria was like opened in like 1995. And now there's taquerias all over the place. But back when that place opened, there weren't as many. And
I'm surprised you didn't say Mudgee's. You're the one who turned me on.
I love Mudgee's too. No, I love Mudgee's, absolutely. I mean, I used to go there when it was called F. McNally's, right? Or what was it called? F something. I had a different name.
Oh, okay.
Can't think of
I didn't know
it
that.
right now. But
Like I said, you turned me on to Mudge's, and I've been going
Mudge's
ever
is
since.
awesome.
Me and
Yeah.
my wife were there every July during the
Yeah.
lobster roll time.
I mean, it's half the
Line.
price as Zingerman's and
Yeah.
probably just as good,
And the last question is, where can we find you?
Well, you can find me in Berkeley when I'm there. You mean my email and phone number?
Social media?
Oh,
all
yeah,
that, you
yeah.
know?
So I don't do a lot of social media, but Craig Regester, I'm on email. For those of you who still email, register@umich.edu. Yeah, I mean, I have an Instagram page, but I never look at it. So
Okay. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Craig Regester,
Hey, it's been
Associate
great.
Director. You're not the acting director anymore, right?
I'm
Okay.
back to
He was
the
the acting
associate
director for like
Yep.
a year and a half, but now he's the associate director for the Semester in Detroit program. Awesome program for students to learn about the city of Detroit, get legitimate community service experience, work experience, immersed in an urban environment. It's a great compliment to study abroad and think something that all students should really consider and think about taking part. Thank you, Craig, for coming
Thank
on.
you.
We really appreciate having you. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the Distinctly Detroit podcast. Please like, rate, and review, or subscribe, and review. And you can get us anywhere you get your pods: Odyssey, Apple Music, Spotify. This has been a production of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. See you all next time. Thank you for listening to the Distinctly Detroit podcast. This is a production of the University of Michigan Detroit Center, and you can find us anywhere you get your pods. Please rate, review, and subscribe. This podcast is directed and produced by Marlon Franklin, edited by Taylor Henniger, with writing contributions by James Neely and Leah Allen. Thank you for listening.